Hey guys and gals and guys, super spies, full of lies. I want some pies. I am so wise. Mr. Craig in a really weird mood. Hey guys, my name is Mr. Craig Knitt, and I work for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Green Bay, specifically the Youth Arts Initiative, which we've now been doing for 5 years plus, and we're very proud of all the cool stuff that you kids have helped us accomplish. So thank you guys. Now, I am here to talk to you guys about making our comic strips today. Continuing, what? Oh, Lenny, thank goodness you're over there. I would have totally forgotten about my show and tell if not for Lenny. This show and tell this week comes from my grandfather, Albert DeBaker. He created a lot of different things, but when he got to be a little bit older, he created some of these traditional toys. And these traditional toys were part of his youth when he was growing up, but then he kind of made them and brought them back into life. It's little mechanical toys. He built a racetrack that had 2 horses with carriages and men riding on the carriages that would run in a circle, and you'd turn this crank, and it was just the most interesting little device. And he built a bunch of those things. He made a handful of these little dancing men. Let me show you what they do. Okay, so what you need is you need a little board like this, and you sit on it. You sit on the board. Sit on the board like that, and you put the little Dancin Man on the board, like so. Hey, Dancin Man. And then you just kind of either tap or move the bottom board, and he starts the dancing. Let's see how it goes. Dancin Man, let's see what we can do to keep him dancing. This is something that is older than all of you kids put together, practically. But it's a traditional toy, and it's made by artisans years and years ago. A lot of fun. Little cute little dancing guy. And so you guys could probably see where I get my love for little weird fun contraptions. Probably get it from my grandfather, who loved his contraptions himself. This week, I finished possibly my last comic strip teased comic, and it is from Zorro. And this one here is exceedingly detailed, very much so. And I want to share with you guys some of the detail that we have in here and how I went about it, but I'm going to just do it in clips because this drawing took a couple hours to make, and I'm not exaggerating. It was a long time. But here, take a look at the screen and we'll talk a little bit about that. Here's one of my sloppy copy plans. Here is a second one of my sloppy copy plans. Here's a third one. Here is a fourth one. So I did 4 different plans to get myself to that final stage. It doesn't happen real quick. You have to really think about, if I'm designing a plan that's going to have all these pictures that are interconnected with one long picture, that's not an easy thing to do. It took a lot of thought and a lot of design. I had to carefully measure out so that particular windows were in a different spot and made it look a little bit more interesting as things went. But I was very happy with the results. Right now I'm weighing between putting a couple word bubbles on it or leaving it silent. I always kind of sometimes I like the silent strips better than anything that's spoken. There's just a little bit added punch to the jokes that are there. Okay, first and foremost, I was using the markers that, the fine line markers, and I'm trying to figure out just exactly what the difference between the markers and some of the nibs are. And I'm not going to show you all of this because some of the drawing kind of went off the bottom of the page. I didn't quite record it right as I was drawing, but you guys can sort of see how much fine line work I like to do. Now, I also was really concentrating on staying with some of those patterns that we did with, which is called atmospheric perspective, where the lines and the darkness in the closer part to you, the blacks are richer and darker and thicker, making the lines thicker, and as they go back into space, they get a little thinner. But that's an illusion, but it really helps to kind of create that look of depth in my drawings. Let's jump ahead here a little bit. As you can see, I'm putting some of the lines on the figure, and just the roof tiles that I was trying to get. I wanted each one of the roof tiles to kind of have some importance, and I was thinking, you know, if this is a comic strip about Zorro, well, obviously it might be kind of like a Spanish roof. And I didn't quite get the angle on the tiles that I wanted to, because the tiles on a Spanish roof or on a roof in Europe many times are rounded. They're kind of a curved tile, and that's sort of what I was thinking about doing, but it didn't quite. I probably should have looked at more resource as I was going. I thought I had looked at enough, but I did not. And I thought it would be kind of cool as I was going. I was not excited. I was not excited about doing this comic strip at all. It's like, okay, Zorro, I don't know. I like the character, but it's never really tripped my fancy. And as I was developing this, all of a sudden I'm like, well, tripped my fancy. What if Zorro tripped? What if Zorro, the great mighty Zorro, who is one of the very first superheroes that ever existed, that's right, he is considered one of the very first comic book heroes, or pulp characters. But what if Zorro accidentally tripped on his mission because he is so good and so nimble-footed? What would happen if he did a little trip? And not just that, what happens if he'd trip and he'd chuck his sword in the air and it would jut into the ground right in front of the guards? Wouldn't that be poetic? Wouldn't that be interesting end to his little tale? And so that's sort of what I was going with. And as I developed the comic, I went with all hours. I went with a couple hours worth of line work on this thing, and just kept going and going and going, as you guys can see. And my GoPro ran out of, I had to restart it a couple of times. And then as I was doing that, it gave me a little bit of time to think about and develop the back wall a little bit more. So it's like, okay, what do I want to do back there? Because some of that direction, some of the lines that I'm using can throw our attention in certain directions. And that will make us, that'll make our drawing that much more interesting, but it also will focus our viewers' eyes on just what we want them to see, which is a great trick that artists can use. And that's something that I was consciously doing. But then I'm like, okay, if I do this, what do I want to do to get the lines finished? And do I want to do an ink wash over the top of the final piece? And I did want to do an ink wash. Unfortunately, I did not record that, as my GoPro was kind of not cooperating with me that night. And you can kind of, I'll just show you with the final results kind of how that worked out. But that is something that I'm very proud of. So I went from a comic strip that I honestly wasn't very excited about. I was not excited about making that comic strip, and the end results are one of my favorites. It's like all of a sudden everything came together to really make for an interesting comic in the end run. That's a really good lesson for artists to know, is that you might not like your very first attempt at what you're doing, but the more you worked it, the more you kind of figured it out and thought about how you're going to lay it out and how everything's going to come together in the end. Maybe all of a sudden it gets to be to a point where it's like, yeah, this could be exciting. I'd like to see what this is going to become. And that's what happened with me and my strip here. Ladies and gentlemen, last week we were talking about surrealism and how, like, we're in a time right now where it feels very surreal, where everything, we know it's real, but it feels unreal. And I talked very briefly about what some of those, what surreal art can be. And I even showed you a handful of different, oh, garbage can just tipped over. How surreal. No, it was just a weird little coincidence. I was showing you examples of my artwork in a very surreal style. But there are two really, really world famous surreal artists, and I wanted to mention them today. I wanted to mention to you guys Rene Magritte. He's one of my favorites. He is, god darn it, I should know where he's from. I know he's from Europe somewhere, but anyways, Rene Magritte grew up in a very somewhat normal location, and where all of the houses were similar, and everybody wore little top hats and did all this different stuff, and he kind of used that to his benefit for his art. If you look at this example right here, you can see that we have a man very much like Rene Magritte himself, and he's got an apple in place where his face was. You might have seen this one before. Here's another example. This is called The Lovers. Ooh, and it is a painting by him as well. And finally, this one here, I'm not exactly sure what the title is on this one. So I think it's called Blank Signature, but I'm not really sure. And if you kind of look at it, it's just like there's a is this animal hidden in here, or is it a part of the drawing? Really like how this one turned out too. Another, probably even more world-noted surrealist artist, known for painting in surreal fashion, where you take real things, put them together in a very unreal way, is Salvador Dali. And Salvador Dali this painting I'm going to show you right now is called The Persistence of Time, and it is probably one of the most famous surreal paintings ever, where you've seen it done with clocks, you've seen it done with pizzas, all different types of things, objects transcended into the same type of shapes. That all comes from this very similar painting. This one here is just called Sleep, and it's like, what is this thing? Is this like a person made out of balloons, or what is that? You can see it's a very real thing. It looks real, but it's not. It's something that's put together in a very unreal way. And finally, this one here is kind of some of his honeycomb things, and it's just very interesting layout for what he's done. And those are some surrealist artists that you guys should probably know a little bit about. I know I should. Probably should know them more. Salvador Dali, for those that are interested, is from Spain. He's a Spanish artist, and he was very famous for his mustachio. He even made some movies, which are really, really weird from what I understand. I haven't seen one yet. I should have probably caught one. Gang, we're talking about our panels and getting our comics done and getting them ready. You know what? I was on another meeting today, and I got this one done and this one done, and as well as making again, I'm always making my sloppy copy, getting my plan ready so that my finished work is even better, and that helps. It helped. I did 2 of these in an hour, so it helped out quite a bit. This one here, I think I still want to do some work on, so it's not quite finished, but it's pretty close. And this is telling about the sequence that I was talking about last week, where I learned a lesson. Mr. Craig learned a big life lesson. And that big life lesson was involving a jar of fancy olives. Expensive fancy olives, by the way. Yes, there are the olives that you can buy that will cost you $10 or more. A jar of olives for $10? Gosh, that's quite expensive. And I really like them. They're stuffed with jalapenos and sometimes stuffed with little garlic cloves. And so they're really fancy, and they're so precious and nice. And the thing that I learned is that when I forgot about them for like a couple months. They were sitting in the back of the refrigerator for such a long time. And I found them in the back there, and I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. I get to have some of my fancy, expensive olives. Yum, yum. And when I opened the jar, they were rotten. They must have gotten spoiled somehow. So I ended up throwing away probably $9 worth of fancy olives because I never ate them right away. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of learning about, is that I also found this remote control toy that I had, and I got for Christmas like 2 or 3 years ago, and I'd never taken it out of the box. And now I took it out of the box, and guess what? The batteries that came with it, they weren't working anymore. They were junk. So I'm kind of learning that when you get something, you shouldn't make it so precious sometimes. You should use it up, or it's going to go to waste, because that's happened to me now with my olives, with some batteries, with a couple other things that I had got to eat that were no longer good anymore. I got some cheese that is now probably not 5 years old, but at least 2 years old, and it's in a plastic case. But cheese, that's probably not good anymore. Come on, guys. It doesn't, the longer that you age some cheese should be aged, but not this stuff. So I'm learning that you don't want to let some of your stuff go to waste because you're thinking that it's so precious. And that's going to be one of my segments. I'm going to tell that story using some of the pictures, and how I'll be a little bit more clear with the things that I learned, because right now I think I'm just kind of making it up as I'm going, which I am. But I think I'll have a little more concrete idea of how to tell that story and what that lesson actually means. Now, with these additional comic strips, I am really, really moving on my drawings. But I also wanted to show you guys, remember that watercolor one I did a while ago? I now have taken my pen nibs and I inked that baby. And it was not easy, but I wanted to kind of talk you through that and show you some examples of that as well. Okay, for this, I was just trying to go into here with my pen nib, and these little fine tips on these pen holders actually you dip into your ink and you can kind of make whatever mark is there. Now, as I started going on here, I learned very quickly that the quality of paper is important. This paper that we're using, which is like kind of copy paper, or it's kind of like bond paper that you would get for copy machines or printers and stuff like that, it's great to draw on and it works really great for most of the work that we do. But if you're going to be drawing with these tiny little pen nibs, which can be pretty sharp, they tend to cut into the paper. And that's really tricky when you're trying to do some fine work, because they tend to bleed out a little bit. And that was not what I was hoping for. Now, each time you dip the ink into the jar, you want to make sure that you're cleaning the tip a little bit. And if you look on the side of my drawing, you can see all these little marks, because every time I do that, I start it with a single mark, and it helps to kind of keep the tip going, so that all of a sudden I'm not going to have an accidental bleh where all the ink is going to run out of it, because that would make me mad. I also learned right here that it is really hard to make perfect ovals with that. And that's a good lesson for me to learn, because I could possibly make my straight lines around the edge with this pen and a ruler, but I've got a nasty feeling that if I were to try to do that, the little pen nib would get caught on the edge and it would probably tear the paper a little bit, and that was not something I wanted to take a risk with. So here you see me, I'm using my markers instead, just to kind of finish up the outside edges and get a nice straight edge on there. Now, here's the cool part too, is that I also have the ability to go in here and finish my drawing using the computer. So here is my picture, and it's almost finished. I'm putting up some of my final lines in here, and it turned out pretty sweet, gotta say. But my lines for the bubble and the box might not be that perfect. So here I took it into the computer and actually went in adding some of my wording and fixed the bubble a little bit so that we can make it just right. And with that, guys and gals, that is how I inked that panel. Would I do that again? What I probably would do is I would still watercolor, but I don't know if I'd use those pen nibs on paper that's that thin. If it's thin paper, it can cause some real troubles when you're trying to make your straight lines. Because if the teeny tiny little teeth of those pens get here, hold on. This right here, I don't know if you can see it that well, but right there is the pen tip that I used. Okay, that's pretty sharp. In fact, if you jabbed yourself with that, that would poke you pretty bad. It would be a owie. It will hurt you. It will hurt you bad. But when you're drawing, just the tiniest little pressure pulls these points apart and lets the ink drop out of the brush that you dipped into it. These are really good tools. These are fantastic tools. They can be messy. My fingertips were pretty dirty by the time I was finished with my drawing, but it can make super fine lines, pretty long lines too. But I mean, you want to dip it in there and make your lines so that it's nice and smooth. I used this watercolor, or not watercolor, this ink, acrylic artist ink. And I just dipped it down into the jar, doop, 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 and made my little line just like so. I've just ordered some paper online. That was pretty expensive. It's way more expensive than this. And as you get to be more and more of a professional, you're going to look at some of the costs of the materials that you got to buy. The paper, the sheet of paper that I'm going to use is about $9, so that's pretty expensive. But that's the cost that it takes to get that done. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel like I've shown you some really cool examples today. I talked to you a little bit about how to ink with nibs, so you got a chance to see a new tool being used. So in kind of, I introduced you guys to a little bit more surrealism. Didn't really have a secret word today. Nib. Nib is our painting tool or a inking tool. A little metal tip for a brush called a nib. And that's going to be our word for today. But with that, I'm going to say that's pretty much what I want you guys to get accomplished or learn about today. I'm taking a class where I'm doing all these awesome drawings, and I'm learning some things with Photoshop that I should have learned a long time ago, and I'm going to get a chance to share them with you very soon when you get back. And if I forget, say, Mr. Craig, I heard about this thing on Photoshop called Multiply. Can you teach me about that? Yeah, I can, because I'm using it now. It's crazy. It's a new tricky thing. And these are some of the examples that I did with my class. I actually did 2. We were only supposed to do 1, and I did 2. So you can see that this one here was made with a badger, and this one here was made with a woodchuck. And now we're learning how to colorize them, so that's going to be the next big thing. Here is my step 1 and step 2, so you can see that I'm still working on it. But I've got a long ways to go. Oh my gosh. So don't stop learning stuff. You guys, don't stop learning stuff. Continue to learn and continue to move forward on all the great artwork that you're doing. Be creative little artists out there. That's the one thing that we always love to see. And this is Mr. Craig with the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Green Bay saying good to throw some learning at you again. I hope you guys are watching these things. I hope so. And I hope to see you guys soon. Mr. Craig, I haven't started. You still can. Mr. Craig, I'm not part of your class. You can still do the work. You can still do the artwork. Mr. Craig, I don't have a pet. Well, you can fold up an origami dog just for yourself. Stop asking weird questions. Mr. Craig, guys, have a great day. Have a great week. Get some things accomplished and stay safe and stay healthy. Bye-bye. Hey, little paint nib. Little ink nib, I should say. What are you doing?